On the night of February 28, 2026, as American and Israeli aircraft struck more than 1,000 Iranian targets in the opening hours of Operation Epic Fury, a distinctive silhouette was captured on open-source air traffic control audio descending out of flight level 600, that is 60,000 feet. The call sign was Snoop-01. The aircraft was a U-2 Dragon Lady, recovering to RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, after a reconnaissance mission in the opening hours of the most significant American military operation in the Middle East since the Iraq War. The U-2 Dragon Lady is 70 years old. It was designed by a man who is no longer alive, built at a facility that did not officially exist, and operated throughout the Cold War on missions so sensitive that even the aircraft's existence was classified. On February 28, 2026, it was doing the same job it had been doing since Dwight Eisenhower was president, flying at the edge of space, looking down at an adversary, and sending what it saw back to people who needed to know. CENTCOM published its official fact sheet covering the first 10 days of Operation Epic Fury on March 9, 2026. The assets listed as employed in the campaign included B-1, B-2, and B-52 bombers, F-15s, F-16s, F-18s, F-22s, and F-35s, A-10 attack aircraft, EA-18G electronic attack aircraft, airborne early warning and control aircraft, the E-2 Advanced Hawkeye, MQ-9 Reapers, and the U-2 Dragon Lady alongside the RC-135 and P-8 Maritime Patrol aircraft. The fact sheet is notable for what it reveals about the architecture of the campaign. Every platform on that list has a specific role. The strike aircraft destroy things. The Reapers hunt mobile targets. The RC-135 collects signals intelligence. The EA-18G jams enemy radar. The U-2 sits above all of them, at altitudes that no other manned aircraft in American service can reach, providing the persistent, broad-area intelligence picture that makes everything else possible. The U-2 was not listed among the assets employed in the first 7 days of the operation. It appeared in the 10-day summary, meaning its participation in the campaign began sometime after the first week. The inference drawn by defense analysts is that in the opening days, when Iranian air defenses were still active and capable, mission planners made different routing and basing decisions for the Dragon Lady. By the second week, with Iranian radar networks, surface-to-air missile batteries, and interceptor bases being systematically destroyed by strike packages, the threat environment at the altitudes where the U-2 operates had shifted enough to task the aircraft more actively. This is consistent with how the platform has been employed in every major conflict in which it has participated. The most dangerous phase of a campaign is often managed with satellites and standoff sensors. When air superiority develops and the threat picture becomes clearer, the U-2 comes in to provide the resolution and the persistence that no satellite or long-range unmanned system can match. The aircraft flew from RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, the same British base from which U-2 Dragon Ladies have operated for decades, including during the original Cold War overflight program in the 1950s and 60s. The open-source ATC capture on February 28 of Snoop-01 descending out of 60,000 feet for recovery at Akrotiri was consistent with a U-2 conducting high-altitude reconnaissance over or near Iranian territory and returning to its forward operating location on the island. Akrotiri's location in the eastern Mediterranean places it within range of Iran for a platform with the U-2's endurance and altitude capability. Iran noticed. In the early days of March 2026, Iran struck back at Akrotiri with a one-way drone. The UK Ministry of Defence confirmed the attack. The drone, described as a Shahed-type one-way kamikaze aircraft, flew approximately 240 kilometers, likely launched from Lebanon, where Iranian-aligned forces and IRGC elements operate, and struck a hangar at RAF Akrotiri used by American U-2 reconnaissance aircraft. A hole of roughly 10 meters was blown through the hangar wall. The UK Ministry of Defence stated that the attack caused minimal damage and that equipment inside the hangar was reportedly undamaged. British authorities confirmed the drone was not launched from Iranian territory, pointing toward Lebanese origin. The fact that Iran targeted that specific hangar, used by U-2 aircraft conducting reconnaissance in support of strikes against Iranian military infrastructure, tells you something about how valuable the intelligence the U-2 was collecting was judged to be by the adversary. On March 17, 2026, BAE Systems was awarded a United States Air Force contract to sustain and modernize the ANAL Q-221 Advanced Defensive System on the U-2 Dragon Lady. The work, awarded by Robins Air Force Base, includes field service support, repairs, and software updates aimed at keeping the aircraft's electronic warfare suite effective against evolving radar and missile threats. BAE stated that the Advanced Defensive System has been continuously developed over a 60-year lifespan and remains integral to the U-2 modernization program. This contract was awarded in the middle of an active combat operation in which U-2 aircraft were flying missions against one of the most advanced integrated air defense networks in the Middle East. It is not a coincidence. The Air Force was investing in the survivability of an aircraft it was actively employing in one of the most demanding threat environments it had encountered. The U-2's role in Operation Epic Fury is precisely what it was designed to do and has been doing since 1956. It provides the intelligence architecture that makes a modern air campaign possible. Before a target can be struck, it must be found. Before it can be found, the electromagnetic environment around it must be characterized. Before strike packages can be routed safely, the location and capability of every radar and missile battery in the adversary's integrated air defense system must be mapped with precision. Before battle damage can be assessed, imagery of what was there before the strike must be compared with imagery of what is there after. The U-2 performs all of these functions. Its signals intelligence suite identifies and geolocates radar emissions from Iranian air defense batteries, providing the targeting data used by Wild Weasel-type aircraft executing suppression missions and by JASSM cruise missiles programmed to strike those batteries. Its synthetic aperture radar produces high-resolution imagery through cloud cover and at night. Its multispectral, electro-optical, and infrared sensors image facilities at resolutions that can distinguish between specific equipment types, vehicle configurations, and structural details that lower-resolution satellite imagery cannot capture. Defense analysts, including reporting from Army Recognition, have described the U-2 as integrated into the ISR architecture supporting Epic Fury alongside the RC-135 and P-8 platforms. The RC-135 rivet joint is a signals intelligence aircraft that flies at medium altitude and is optimized for signals collection across a broad spectrum. The P-8 Poseidon is a maritime patrol aircraft also capable of signals collection and surface surveillance. These platforms collectively form an ISR network that feeds targeting data, threat characterization, and battle space awareness into CENTCOM's targeting cycle in real time. The U-2 sits above them in altitude, above most of the threat envelope, looking down at a broader geographic area, with a sensor suite that can simultaneously collect imagery intelligence, signals intelligence, and measurement and signature intelligence in a single sortie. The Air Force has noted that demand from combatant commanders for U-2 capabilities has continued despite the aircraft's age and the parallel development of unmanned alternatives. The aircraft's unique ability to operate at altitudes above 70,000 feet, carry a modular sensor suite that can be reconfigured between missions, and deliver intelligence to ground exploitation centers in near real time means that no other platform in the current American inventory replicates its specific combination of altitude, persistence, and collection flexibility. The RQ-4 Global Hawk unmanned aircraft comes closest in terms of altitude and endurance, but has a smaller payload than the U-2 and lacks the Dragon Lady's ability to rapidly swap sensor configurations. The U-2 can change its entire mission payload between sorties in response to evolving collection requirements in ways that take longer to implement on the Global Hawk. This is why, despite years of planned retirement schedules and repeated congressional debates about whether to divest the U-2 fleet, the aircraft is still flying combat missions over Iran in 2026. The Air Force originally planned to retire the U-2 in fiscal year 2026, consistent with a broader consolidation of high-altitude ISR capability into unmanned systems. Reports from specialized defense outlets since 2024 had pointed to a divestiture beginning in 2025 and potentially completing in 2026. Some aircraft had already been withdrawn from the active fleet ahead of the formal retirement date. But the outbreak of Operation Epic Fury and the operational demands of a sustained campaign against Iran created exactly the conditions under which the U-2's unique capabilities cannot be replaced by available alternatives. Operation Epic Fury may represent one of the Dragon Lady's final operational deployments. it is also, by any measure, one of its most consequential. Now let us understand what makes this aircraft capable of what it is doing over Iran at the edge of the 21st century. The U-2S is a single-seat, single-engine, high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft. Its defining physical characteristic is immediately obvious to anyone who sees it. The wings are extraordinarily long and narrow, spanning 105 feet on the current U-2R and U-2S variants, attached to a fuselage that is only 63 feet long. The resulting aspect ratio, the ratio of wingspan to average wing chord, is dramatically higher than any other military aircraft in current service. These wings give the U-2 glider-like aerodynamic properties. They generate lift at high altitude with remarkable efficiency, allowing the aircraft to sustain flight at altitudes where the air is so thin that the engines of a conventional aircraft would starve and the wings of a conventional aircraft would have no meaningful aerodynamic surface to work with. The U-2 can operate in sustained level flight above 70,000 feet because its wing design was optimized for exactly that environment. The aircraft operates in what pilots call the coffin corner, one of the most physiologically and aerodynamically demanding environments any manned aircraft has ever been designed to enter. At 70,000 feet and above, the airspeed envelope within which the aircraft can safely fly is extremely narrow. The stall speed, below which the wings lose lift and the aircraft falls, is very close to the maximum speed, above which structural loads and compressibility effects will damage or destroy the aircraft. The gap between these two limits can be as little as 10 knots of indicated airspeed at extreme altitude. A slight gust or a moment of inattention can push the aircraft from one edge of this envelope to the other. Managing that margin while simultaneously operating a complex multi-sensor intelligence collection payload, monitoring systems, and navigating a mission profile that may last 10 to 12 hours requires the kind of precision that has earned the U-2 a widely accepted distinction as the most difficult aircraft in the world to fly. The landing characteristics reinforce that assessment. The U-2 does not use conventional aircraft landing gear. It uses a bicycle-type arrangement with a single main gear under the forward fuselage and a single tail wheel, supplemented by detachable outrigger gear on the wings called pogos. When the aircraft takes off, the pogo outriggers fall away and are recovered from the runway by ground crews. The aircraft then lands on its two-point bicycle gear without the wing outriggers, requiring a precisely controlled approach in which the aircraft must be flared to a near stall before settling onto the runway. Forward visibility from the cockpit is restricted by the extended nose and the narrow canopy. To assist the pilot in judging altitude and runway alignment during final approach, a second U-2 pilot pursues the landing aircraft in a high-performance chase car on the runway, calling out altitude and alignment over the radio. Without the chase car, landing the U-2 is described by pilots as nearly impossible on a consistent basis. With it, it requires extraordinary skill. There are no casual U-2 landings. Every U-2 pilot wears a full-pressure suit, equivalent in concept to a spacesuit, throughout the mission. At the altitudes where the U-2 operates, the atmospheric pressure is insufficient to sustain human life without pressurization. If the cockpit pressurization failed at 70,000 feet, the pilot would lose consciousness within seconds and die within minutes in the absence of a sealed pressure suit. The suit also provides thermal protection against temperatures that can reach -60 degrees Celsius at operating altitude. Putting on the suit, connecting its systems, and pre-breathing pure oxygen for 1 hour before flight to purge nitrogen from the bloodstream and prevent decompression sickness are standard procedures before every U-2 mission. The U-2S, the current operational variant, is powered by a single General Electric F-118-GE-101 turbofan engine producing 19,000 pounds of thrust. The F-118 is a non-afterburning, two-spool turbofan derived from the same family as the engine used in the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. The non-afterburning design was selected because it provides better fuel efficiency for the extended cruise profiles that define U-2 missions. The engine produces sufficient thrust to climb the aircraft to operating altitude at a rate of approximately 15,000 feet per minute to around 25,000 feet, after which the climb rate decreases as the air thins, requiring a slower, more gradual ascent to reach the operational ceiling above 70,000 feet. The F-118 replaced the original Pratt & Whitney J75 turbojet engine in a re-engining program that ran from 1992 to 1998, resulting in the redesignation of all Air Force U-2 aircraft to the U-2S standard. The new engine provided significantly improved service ceiling, range, and control characteristics compared to the J-75. The aircraft's modular payload architecture is its most operationally significant characteristic after its altitude capability. The U-2 carries sensors in 3 primary locations: the nose bay, the Q bay behind the cockpit, and underwing pods called superpods mounted on hardpoints approximately 10 feet outboard of the fuselage on each wing. These bays and pods are interchangeable between missions. A U-2 that flew an imagery intelligence mission today can be reconfigured overnight to fly a signals intelligence mission tomorrow with an entirely different sensor suite. This flexibility is what makes the U-2 irreplaceable in a rapidly evolving operational environment where collection requirements shift faster than the mission planning cycle. The primary imagery intelligence sensor on the current U-2S is the Senior Year Electro-Optical Reconnaissance System, designated SIRES-2C, supplied by Collins Aerospace. This is a multispectral electro-optical and infrared imaging system that delivers ultra-high-resolution imagery across multiple spectral bands simultaneously. The multispectral capability means the sensor collects visible light imagery and near-infrared, mid-wave infrared, and long-wave infrared imagery at the same time, each wavelength band revealing different information about the target. Visible light imagery shows what the human eye would see. Near-infrared reveals vegetation health and material differences. Thermal infrared detects heat signatures from engines, facilities, and equipment. The combination of all bands in a single collection pass provides target analysts with a far richer picture than any single band sensor can produce. The Advanced Synthetic Aperture Radar System, designated ASARS-2A and its successor ASARS-2B, is the U-2's all-weather day and night radar imaging system developed by Raytheon. Synthetic aperture radar generates high-resolution imagery by synthesizing the effect of a very large antenna from the motion of the aircraft over time. The ASARS system uses electronically scanned antennas with V-shaped planar arrays, scanning the ground on each side of the aircraft as it flies. The radar can produce imagery through cloud cover, through haze, and in complete darkness, providing persistent ground surveillance capability regardless of weather conditions. The ASARS-2B upgrade, part of the current Block 20.1 program, significantly improves the radar's high-altitude deep-look ground mapping, moving target indication, and maritime surveillance capabilities, and moves to an open architecture that can be more readily upgraded as threats evolve. The Airborne Signals Intelligence Payload, known by its acronym ASIP and developed by Northrop Grumman, provides the U-2's signals intelligence collection capability. SIGINT collection from the U-2 involves the detection, identification, and geolocation of electronic emissions from a broad range of sources, including radar systems, communications networks, missile guidance signals, and other electronic emitters. Flying at 70,000 feet, the U-2 can detect signals that are below the radio horizon of ground-based and airborne sensors at lower altitudes, effectively seeing over geographic features that would otherwise block collection. The signals intelligence payload in the superpods houses the most sensitive collection systems. Using the altitude and the long lines of sight available from above 70,000 feet to collect signals from deep inside defended territory without the aircraft itself crossing the threat boundary. The combination of simultaneous SIGINT, imagery intelligence, and measurement and signature intelligence collection in a single sortie is one of the U-2's most distinctive operational characteristics. Measurement and signature intelligence, known as MESINT, refers to technical intelligence derived from the physical characteristics of equipment and phenomena, including radar emissions, electromagnetic signatures, acoustic signatures, and nuclear, biological, and chemical indicators. The U-2's sensor suite can detect and characterize these signatures at altitudes and from geometries that are not available to lower flying platforms. During the Iran campaign, the ability to simultaneously map Iranian radar emissions, image missile storage facilities, and characterize signatures from suspected weapons production sites in a single mission profile provides targeting analysts with a comprehensive target package that multiple separate platform sorties could not replicate with the same timeliness. All intelligence products except traditional film can be transmitted in near real time via data links to ground exploitation centers anywhere in the world. The U-2 uses both line-of-sight data links and over-horizon satellite communications links to send its intelligence to analysts who may be located at Beale Air Force Base in California, at CENTCOM headquarters, at forward intelligence centers in the theater, or at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and National Security Agency back in the continental United States. The intelligence arrives while the mission is still ongoing, allowing analysts to task the aircraft to collect additional imagery of a specific building, re-examine a particular area of interest, or adjust the collection profile based on what the data is revealing in real time. The Distributed Common Ground System, DCGS, provides the network architecture that connects the U-2's airborne sensors with the analysis centers that process its take. The Block 20 cockpit upgrade replaced the analog instruments of earlier U-2 variants with a modern glass cockpit using digital displays, a digital autopilot, and a modernized electronic warfare system. The Block 10 electrical system upgrade replaced legacy wiring throughout the aircraft with advanced fiber optic technology, reducing the aircraft's electronic noise signature to provide a quieter electromagnetic environment for the most sensitive sensor systems. The U-2S's Open Mission Systems architecture, developed to comply with the Air Force's Joint All-Domain Operations Computing Standards, allows new sensors, new data links, and new processing capabilities to be integrated on the aircraft in weeks rather than years. Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works has described this as the quantum leap U-2 concept, positioning the platform as a technology demonstrator and rapid integration testbed in addition to its primary operational ISR role. The AN/AL-Q221 Advanced Defensive System, the electronic warfare suite that BAE Systems was contracted to sustain and modernize in March 2026, provides the U-2 with self-protection against radar-guided surface-to-air missiles and airborne intercept radars. Flying at 70,000 feet does not guarantee immunity from modern surface-to-air missile systems. The Iranian SA-2 that destroyed Francis Gary Powers' aircraft in 1960 reached 68,000 feet. Modern systems like the Russian-supplied S-300 and Iran's domestic Bavar-373 have engagement envelopes that extend to altitudes at which the U-2 operates. The AL-Q221 detects radar emissions, characterizes the threat, and generates jamming, deception, and expendable responses to protect the aircraft. BAE has described the system as having been continuously matured over a 60-year lifespan, with regular software and hardware updates to keep the threat library current against evolving radar technologies. The 9th Reconnaissance Wing at Beale Air Force Base in California is the U-2's home unit. All U-2 pilots are trained at Beale on 5 two-seat training aircraft designated as TU-2S before deploying to operational detachments. Forward operating locations include RAF Fairford in the United Kingdom, Osan Air Base in South Korea, and RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. The detachment at Akrotiri has been operating continuously since the 1960s, when the original U-2A flew from Cyprus on CIA overflight missions into the Middle East and Soviet peripheral territory. The aircraft that is doing this job in 2026 over Iran is almost entirely different from the original U-2A in terms of sensors, avionics, engines, and cockpit systems. But the airframe is recognizably the same bicycle landing gear, the same long glider wings, the same single engine in the center fuselage, the same pressure suit requirement. Kelly Johnson designed something so fundamentally correct for the mission it was given that 70 years of improvements have not changed the underlying concept. They have only made it more capable. To understand how this aircraft came to exist and why it became one of the most historically significant intelligence-gathering platforms ever built, you need to go back to a particular moment in 1953 when a lean-driven and extraordinarily capable engineer named Clarence Leonard Johnson sat down and proposed something that the United States Air Force did not want. Clarence Leonard Johnson, known to everyone as Kelly Johnson, was by 1953 already one of the most accomplished aircraft designers in the history of American aviation. He was the man who designed the P-38 Lightning, the twin-boom, twin-engine fighter that became one of the dominant American aircraft of World War II. He designed the P-80 Shooting Star, the first American jet fighter to see combat. He designed the F-104 Starfighter. He had built and led the Skunk Works, Lockheed's Advanced Development Division, since its founding in 1943, an organization whose defining characteristic was speed and secrecy. In the Skunk Works, Johnson operated with a small team of engineers under a management philosophy he codified as 14 rules, the first of which was to give the Skunk Works manager complete control of the program. No committees, no bureaucracy, direct access to the customer, small teams, fast decisions. In 1953, Johnson proposed an aircraft he called the CL-282. The design was based on the fuselage of the F-104, but with long, slender, glider-like wings replacing the starfighter's tiny stub wings. The purpose of the CL-282 was to fly at altitudes above 70,000 feet, above the capability of Soviet fighters and early Soviet radar systems, and photograph Soviet military installations with high-resolution cameras. The CL-282 was essentially a jet-powered sailplane. It took off from a wheeled cart, which would be jettisoned after takeoff, and landed on its belly since landing gear added weight that Johnson did not want to carry. The United States Air Force, which initially evaluated the CL-282, rejected it. Air Force leadership preferred a different design, the Bell X-16, which was a more conventional twin-engine aircraft. Strategic Air Command Chief General Curtis LeMay was dismissive of Johnson's design. LeMay preferred bombers and fighters to what he considered an overly delicate and impractical aircraft. The design found a different sponsor. Trevor Gardner, an aide to the Secretary of the Air Force, brought the CL-282 to the attention of the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA's Director of Central Intelligence was Allen Dulles, and the man in charge of technical intelligence programs was Richard Bissell, a brilliant and aggressive intelligence officer who would become one of the most consequential figures in CIA history. Bissell recognized immediately what the CL-282 could do. The United States was flying blind over the Soviet Union. The Soviets had detonated their first nuclear device in 1949, surprising American intelligence, which had estimated a later date. By the early 1950s, the Soviets were developing intercontinental ballistic missiles and long-range bombers. American intelligence had no reliable way to assess the pace or scale of these programs. Human intelligence assets inside the Soviet Union were being systematically compromised and rolled up by the KGB. The need for a technical collection capability that could penetrate Soviet airspace safely was urgent. In November 1954, CIA Director Allen Dulles directed Richard Bissell to develop an aircraft capable of sustained flight above 60,000 feet. The project was codenamed Aquatone. Lockheed was selected over competing proposals. In March 1955, Lockheed received a contract worth $22.5 million for the first 20 aircraft. The first payment, $1.26 million, was mailed by Bissell directly to Kelly Johnson's home to keep work moving while the formal contract was being negotiated. This was funded through the CIA's unvouchered accounts, which under the Central Intelligence Agency Act of 1949 allowed the agency's director to spend money outside normal federal accounting requirements with no external oversight. The design that was actually built differed from the original CL-282 in several ways. President Eisenhower specified that the aircraft must be operated by civilian CIA pilots rather than military personnel to preserve deniability if an aircraft were lost. The landing belly approach was replaced with actual landing gear, the bicycle arrangement with pogo outriggers still used today, because operational pilots were not willing to accept belly landings on every flight. The engine was changed from the General Electric J-73 to the higher-performance Pratt & Whitney J-57 to achieve the altitude requirement with greater margin. Shell Oil developed a new low-volatility, low-vapor-pressure jet fuel that would not boil off at high altitude, which became known as JP7. When Johnson ordered altimeters calibrated to 80,000 feet from a supplier whose instruments only reached 45,000 feet, the CIA established a cover story about experimental rocket aircraft to explain the order. Construction was conducted at Lockheed's Skunk Works facility in Burbank, California, with the aircraft then transported to a remote test location in Nevada that would become known as Area 51. The site near Groom Lake had been selected by Johnson and the CIA as the ideal location for secret test operations, remote enough that operations were invisible to uninvited observers, with a dry lakebed suitable for emergency landings. The first U-2 prototype made its first flight on August 1, 1955, at Area 51. The test pilot was Lockheed's Tony LeVier. The date is recorded as August 1 in most historical accounts. though some subsequent CIA documentation lists August 4th. The aircraft reached 32,000 feet on that first flight, and by August 16th, the prototype had flown at 52,000 feet, an altitude never previously reached in sustained flight by any aircraft. By September 8th, it reached 65,000 feet. The first U-2 had been built in 88 days from contract signing to first flight. LeVier found landing the aircraft extremely difficult in the initial test flights. The glider-like wings generated so much lift at low altitude, even near the stall, that the aircraft floated above the runway for long distances before settling. On his sixth attempt, he discovered that touching down on the rear wheel first was more effective than the conventional nose wheel first approach. The chase car arrangement to assist landings was established during the test program and has remained standard procedure ever since. By January 1956, the U-2 had so impressed the Air Force that it decided to acquire its own fleet in addition to the CIA's aircraft. The Air Force purchased a total of 31 U-2 aircraft through the CIA, with the transaction's codename Project Dragon Lady providing the aircraft's enduring nickname. The first CIA overflight of the Soviet Union took place on July 4, 1956, a date chosen because it was an American holiday and because Soviet security and air defense units might be less alert. The mission flew from Wiesbaden, Germany over East Germany, Poland, and Belarusia to the Minsk area, then returned. Soviet MiG-15 and MiG-17 fighters attempted to intercept the aircraft but could not reach its altitude. The photographs taken on that first mission revealed Soviet long-range bomber bases and provided imagery intelligence that American analysts had never possessed. The Soviet military knew the overflight had occurred. They tracked it on radar throughout. They complained through diplomatic channels. The United States denied it. Over the following 4 years, the CIA and, to a lesser extent, the Air Force conducted 26 missions over the Soviet Union with U-2 aircraft. The flights gathered photography of Soviet bomber bases, missile test facilities, nuclear production sites, submarine construction yards, and military installations across an enormous geographic area that had previously been entirely opaque to Western intelligence. One of the most important discoveries was that the so-called missile gap, the claim that the Soviets held a decisive numerical advantage in intercontinental ballistic missiles, was a myth. American intelligence, based on distorted estimates and incomplete data, had concluded that the Soviets might have significantly more ICBMs than the United States. U-2 photography of Soviet missile sites revealed that the gap did not exist in the form that had been claimed, a finding with enormous implications for American defense policy and nuclear strategy. The CIA also flew U-2 missions over China, Cuba, and other targets. Chinese nationalist pilots based in Taiwan flew agency U-2 aircraft on missions over the People's Republic of China to gather intelligence on Chinese military facilities and, as China's nuclear program developed, on nuclear testing sites. At least 5 of these Chinese nationalist pilots were shot down over mainland China during the course of the program. The CIA maintained an information embargo around this aspect of the program for decades. The Soviet Union was working on the problem of intercepting the U-2 from the moment the overflights began. They knew the aircraft was there. Their radar networks tracked it on every mission. But the fighters they could field could not reach its altitude. The answer was the surface-to-air missile. The Soviet SA-2 guideline, which NATO designated the S-75 Divina, was a radar-guided missile system with an engagement ceiling capable of reaching the altitude at which the U-2 operated. The Soviets began deploying SA-2 systems around key facilities the U-2 was known to photograph. On May 1, 1960, CIA pilot Francis Gary Powers took off from an airbase at Peshawar in Pakistan, bound for a base at Bodo in Norway. His flight plan crossed approximately 2,900 miles of Soviet airspace, passing over the Teratam missile test complex, the uranium enrichment facility at Sverdlovsk, the Plesetsk missile site, and other targets of high intelligence value. The mission was one of a series ordered by President Eisenhower in the weeks before a planned Paris summit between Eisenhower and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, a meeting intended to advance arms control discussions. Near Sverdlovsk, at an altitude of approximately 68,000 feet, an SA-2 missile exploded in proximity to Powers' aircraft. The explosion damaged the U-2's tail section. The aircraft entered an uncontrolled dive. Powers was unable to activate the aircraft's self-destruct system before ejecting, and he parachuted to the ground, where he was captured by Soviet security forces. Parts of the aircraft were recovered. The wreckage was displayed publicly in Moscow as evidence of American espionage. The diplomatic consequences were immediate and severe. Before the Soviets revealed that Powers had survived, the Eisenhower administration denied the mission, asserting that the aircraft was a NASA weather research plane that had accidentally strayed off course. When Khrushchev produced Powers alive and displayed the aircraft wreckage, the cover story collapsed. President Eisenhower was forced to acknowledge that the overflights had been occurring. Khrushchev used the incident to demand an apology and a guarantee that overflights would cease. Eisenhower refused to apologize. Khrushchev walked out of the Paris summit, which collapsed before it began. The diplomatic damage from the U-2 incident set back American-Soviet relations significantly, at a moment when real progress on arms control had seemed possible. Francis Gary Powers was tried before a Soviet court on August 19, 1960, his 31st birthday. He was convicted of espionage and sentenced to 10 years in prison, with 3 years to be served as actual imprisonment. He served 21 months before being exchanged on February 10, 1962, on the Glienicke Bridge in Berlin for Rudolf Abel, a Soviet intelligence officer who had been arrested in the United States. The exchange was later depicted in Steven Spielberg's film Bridge of Spies. Powers returned to the United States to a cold reception from some quarters who questioned whether he had cooperated with his captors. The CIA's own assessment concluded that he had behaved appropriately under the circumstances and had not compromised critical program secrets. Kelly Johnson later hired Powers as a test pilot at Lockheed. Powers was killed in a helicopter crash in California in 1977 while working as an airborne news reporter. The shoot-down of Powers and the end of American overflights of Soviet territory did not end the U-2 program, it redirected it. The aircraft shifted its primary operational focus to other targets, where Soviet surface-to-air missile coverage was not as complete. Cuba became an immediate priority. In October 1962, a U-2 piloted by Air Force Major Richard Heiser conducted a reconnaissance mission over western Cuba on October 14th and returned with photography that showed Soviet medium-range ballistic missile launch sites under construction at San Cristobal. This imagery, when analyzed by the National Photographic Interpretation Center, provided the Kennedy administration with the first definitive evidence that the Soviet Union was deploying nuclear-capable ballistic missiles to Cuba. The discovery triggered 13 days of the most dangerous nuclear confrontation in human history, known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. The U-2's intelligence directly enabled President Kennedy to confront Khrushchev with specific, undeniable evidence of the deployment, rather than with assessments or estimates that could be contested. During the Cuban Missile Crisis itself, U-2 flights over Cuba continued to monitor the construction of missile sites and the movement of Soviet ships. On October 27, 1962, Air Force Major Rudolph Anderson Jr. was flying a U-2 reconnaissance mission over Cuba when his aircraft was struck by an SA-2 missile and destroyed. Anderson was killed, becoming the only American combatant killed in action during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was awarded the Air Force Cross posthumously. The same day that Anderson was shot down, another U-2 flying a mission over the Arctic accidentally entered Soviet airspace due to a navigation error, triggering a Soviet fighter response and a period of extreme tension during which both sides' forces were on the highest alert. The aircraft turned back before an intercept was made. The incident was subsequently described as one of the most dangerous moments of the crisis, a near-accidental confrontation at the moment when both superpowers were already at the brink. Through the 1960s and into the 70s, U-2 aircraft flew reconnaissance missions over Vietnam, China, and other regions of strategic interest. Missions over China, flown by Chinese nationalist pilots, suffered additional losses to Chinese-operated surface-to-air missiles. The Air Force flew U-2 missions over North Vietnam to monitor logistics and military movements along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and to assess battle damage from American bombing campaigns. The U-2R, which first flew on August 28, 1967, was a substantially redesigned and enlarged aircraft, approximately 40% larger than the original U-2A, with a wingspan of 105 feet and a greatly extended fuselage. The U-2R had significantly more internal volume for sensors and fuel. extending range and endurance while accommodating larger and more capable intelligence collection systems. The R model was produced in small numbers initially, delivered between 1967 and 1968. Production reopened in 1979 to build the TR-1A, which was structurally identical to the U-2R, but carried the designation Tactical Reconnaissance, reflecting its intended role in monitoring Warsaw Pact forces in Central Europe from bases in England. The TR-1A first flew on August 1, 1981. 33 TR-1A aircraft were built before production ended. In 1992, all TR-1s and remaining U-2Rs in Air Force service were redesignated as U-2Rs under a unified designation system. Between 1992 and 1998, all Air Force U-2 aircraft were re-engined with the General Electric F-118-GE-101 turbofan, an engine derived from the same family used in the B-2 Spirit bomber. The re-engining produced the U-2S designation that the aircraft carries today. The F-118 provided better performance, greater reliability, and a higher service ceiling than the Pratt & Whitney J-75 it replaced. Lockheed received a $50 million contract from the Air Force in 2020 to conduct the avionics tech refresh upgrade, providing the U-2S with a modernized avionics suite, an upgraded cockpit, and a mission computer compliant with the Open Mission System standard. The Air Force has stated that since 1994, approximately $1.7 billion has been invested in modernizing the U-2 airframe and sensors. The U-2 appeared in the American public consciousness in a dramatic and concrete way in February 2023 when a Chinese high-altitude surveillance balloon entered continental American airspace and transited the continental United States before being shot down by an F-22 Raptor over the Atlantic Ocean. During the balloon's transit, a U-2 Dragon Lady was tasked to investigate it from above, flying alongside the balloon in the upper atmosphere. The Pentagon released an image taken from the U-2's cockpit showing the balloon below and to the side of the aircraft, with the curvature of the Earth visible in the background. The photograph captured, in a single frame, the surreal environment in which U-2 pilots operate. Sky turning from blue to black above. The planet curving away below. A Chinese surveillance platform in between. The image circulated worldwide as evidence of both Chinese espionage activities and American reconnaissance capability. The Beale Air Force Base 9th Reconnaissance Wing, which operates the U-2 fleet, has been the home of American strategic reconnaissance aviation since the Cold War. The wing also operated the SR-71 Blackbird, the Mach 3+ successor to the U-2, for penetrating Soviet airspace after the power shoot-down ended the era of slow, high-altitude overflights. The SR-71 was retired in 1990 and briefly returned to service in the mid-1990s before final retirement in 1998. Its retirement left the U-2 as the Air Force's only manned strategic high-altitude ISR platform, a distinction it holds to this day. The aircraft that has been flying over Iran in 2026 was, in most cases, built in the 1980s as a TR-1A, re-engined in the 90s to U-2S standard, and progressively modernized through a series of avionics and sensor upgrades over the following 3 decades. The most senior aircraft in the fleet have accumulated approximately 17,000 flight hours, which Lockheed estimates represents roughly 80% of the airframe's total service life remaining, a remarkable statistic for an aircraft that began construction in the Cold War. When the U-2 finally retires, it will leave behind a record unmatched by any intelligence collection platform in history. It discovered the non-existence of the missile gap. It provided the photographs that triggered the Cuban Missile Crisis negotiations. It monitored Soviet nuclear tests, Chinese missile programs, Vietnamese logistics, and every major military development in the Middle East for 7 decades. It flew within the legal and physical margins of the most heavily defended airspace on the planet, and returned with intelligence that changed the decisions of presidents. And on a night in February 2026, it descended out of 60,000 feet over the eastern Mediterranean toward a British airbase on the island of Cyprus, carrying a payload of imagery and signals collected over Iran that would flow into the targeting cycle of a campaign that struck more than 5,000 Iranian military targets in 10 days. The Dragon Lady was there at the beginning of the Cold War. It was there at the beginning of Operation Epic Fury. For an aircraft that the Air Force has been planning to retire for years, it continues to find new reasons to stay.